the Chicago School of Economics, this notion of laissez-faire, that you don't want the government involved in any type of, perceived central planning, and so therefore we just we give corporations free rein, and they'll take care of it, and as they pursue their best interest, it'll be the best thing for society. I mean, is that essentially an extension of that ideology?
So that ideology, that ideology is very powerful, and they developed the governing tools to actually instrumentalize the libertarian world that we're living in. But this ideology comes from the left, and that's what the left doesn't want to hear. The counterculture, a lot of the cultural, the attacks on governing institutions as irrelevant, and really thinking about our problems in America as resulting from culture, that is fundamentally the ideological framework that underpins libertarianism. And it underpins it on the left, and it underpins it on the right. The entire culture war is based on a libertarian understanding of what is politics. And that is a left-wing framework. There are, the right are the ones who kind of develop the tool set, but you talk to any number of Democrats and you bring up antitrust, you bring up monopoly, and they'll just look at you funny. Like, what does that have to do with politics? What does that have to do with anything? And that is a deep-rooted ideological framework. It took, a lot of training to get people to where they are now, and to not even see what is right in front of them.
Okay, but when you say left, you're talking about essentially sort of liberal democratic, just sort of mainstream. I mean, I just want to be clear on that terminology.
I'm talking about John Kenneth Galbraith and Richard Hofstadter and Herbert Marcuse, and the kind of the intellectual heritage of the counterculture. There was in the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s, there were a series of arguments that said that the Vietnam War, the segregation, and a progressive conception of national unity and focus on governing institutions was wrong. And they took the arguments about segregation, and they took arguments about the Vietnam War, and said, which were completely legitimate and right, and they said, let's not reform our institutions to address those problems and build a national consensus around a different way of governing. And let's, move those, let's change the way our markets work so they're fair and equal. They said, no, let's just attack our governing institutions. Let's just destroy our governing institutions, right? That's what you see. You don't see anyone saying, let's reform our institutions to make them functional. You just see, let's destroy them because we don't like what they're doing. You see this on the right. They're like, let's go after the IRS. Let's just defund it. Let's destroy it because they were mean to a conservative one time or something like that. And you see it on the left too. I don't see anyone. We had 4 years of Trump when he was doing terrible things to immigrants. I didn't see anyone put together a coherent plan to reform or restructure ICE because they didn't think about institutional reform. They didn't think about government. They don't care about the actual details of how we run our society. I'm very angry about this, by the way, because in case it's not obvious,
it comes.
But
it's outrageous.
Right, but ICE was an institution that was formed in the wake of 9/11. It's hardly, I think, an instrumental governing body that can be equated to, say, the IRS.
That's not true. ICE was a combobulation of a whole series of other, agencies that got stuffed into a new agency. It was sort of a renaming of, INS, and then they threw in some custom stuff in there too. And, I'll take your question on and just assume you're right. The premise of the question, I can accept the premise of the question, which is that, it's a new thing. I think one of the things that disturbed me about about ICE, the debate over ICE, is that there wasn't an attempt to say, okay, we have borders. How are we going to manage these borders? And what are the institutions going to look like to manage those borders? It just was this, we don't want to deal with the problem, right? And that's why you didn't see any, they don't have any coherent approach to actually restructuring, ICE, which is clearly a very scary agency and desperately needs reform, right? I mean, I agree with the dreamers, and I think we should have a lot more immigration. But fundamentally, we actually need to think about the institutional details, and the failure to think about institutional details. And this is true in markets. I don't deal with immigration. I don't, but across the board, what I'm just saying is shipping. We have a huge problem with shipping containers. We have a huge problem with railroads right now. We have a huge problem with oil pipelines, with cybersecurity, with all these parts of our society and our politics, left-wing politics in particular. That just doesn't register. It's just not part of politics. None of that stuff is part of politics.
I mean, so you brought up the IRS. I mean, isn't part of, in fact, the infrastructure deal was essentially a way to get more assets to the IRS and have them just function better? I mean, we have gone through a 4-year period where there was an explicit agenda of attacking the administrative state. And if I understand you correctly, what you're largely saying is that the right has an agenda relative to the administrative state, which is tear it down, and the left, broadly speaking, doesn't have an agenda relative to the administrative state.
I mean, you want to talk about who wrecked the administrative state? It was Bill Clinton.
Right.
He's the guy that destroyed it, and then Obama destroyed it too, and so did Bush, and so did Trump. But this idea that Trump was attacking the administrative state, you're right about that, and I know that that's something that you think about. But when people were told in 2017, 2018, 2018, oh, Trump is attacking the administrative state, they got very upset about it. They weren't upset that he was doing what had been happening for decades. They were just upset because somebody told them, here's a new thing that you can be upset about, about Trump doing. And it's not like they care now whether Biden is actually changing contracting rules to undo what some of the things that Trump did. They don't care. They don't notice. They don't even know what the administrative state is. And so it's that this is I'm saying this, I feel like I'm in a crazy world, right? Where you have really serious problems okay, here's another one, the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal isn't a thing. It is a congressional resolution with a bunch of just vague comments. It's not a thing, right? There is no actual policy roadmap there. And yet people talk about it like it's the thing. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. I'm not saying we absolutely need a huge project to decarbonize our economy. We need to go through and address problems like how we make steel and how we make cement and electric utilities and all of the rest of it. That's absolutely essential. And it's very clear that our weather is changing in really, really bad ways. But it's how are we in a situation where we're not actually proposing anything? That's crazy. So anyway, I don't want to get
too bogged down in this aspect of it, because on some level, it seems to me that you're talking about a broad problem with the general public and their lack of awareness about any of these sort of it's not just the broad public. I actually think that this problem is situated on the left. The left actively resists thinking about governing institutions as part of politics. That's actually what's opposed to whom though? You're saying that this is on the right? Is there a Lena Khan coming out of the right? Is there a Tim Wu coming out of the right? Is there, are these?
Look, the anti-monopoly movement does have people on the right, but you're right that the anti-monopoly movement is the only group that is actually thinking about institutional power and actually thinking about details.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.